Hello students. In this little short video I'm going to show you how to round. Now in this exercise you're being told how many sig figs to round to. Normally in the next couple of videos or lessons we'll show you how to figure out how many to round to, but for this video you're just being told round to 3 places or something like that. This sheet is kind of designed as a tutorial. So at the top you've got a couple of examples with the rules that we sort of follow. So let's go through these rules. Number 1, underline the first 3 or ever how many you're being asked for. This problem in these examples up here is 3. Underline the sig figs and the number and write them down. So we'll do that in a moment. Number 2, it says go back to your number, circle the number after your underline. So in other words, it's asking us to look for the number behind the last sig fig, because if you remember from elementary school, that's where you look to see if you round up or round down. And if you've forgotten that, if the number behind the last sig fig is less than 5, so 0 through 4, you round down. You just leave it like it is. And if it's 5 or higher, 5 to 9, you're going to round up. And that's very important. Now, rule number 3, if your original number was less than 1, in other words, if it has a decimal with a bunch of zeros in the front, put all those zeros that were in the front in the new number. In other words, don't drop them. Those are very important. They're placeholders. They've got to be there. If your number was more than 1, in other words, so it's huge, count how many numbers were after your underlined numbers, but do not count any after the decimal. So that's kind of confusing, but basically it's saying, again, don't drop those placeholding values for big numbers because they are also very important. In the examples, I will walk you through that. But let's go back to the top here for a couple of examples. We have a small number here, so let's find those 3 sig figs. Don't start counting until you get to the first number, which in this case is a 5. Alright, so the next one's a 9, so that's the second sig fig, and then the 7. So those 5, 9, and 7 are my 3 sig fig places. Now look, rule 2, look at the number behind it. In this case it's an 8. We know from elementary school that the 8 tells us we're going to have to round this 7 up to an 8. So we're going to keep all these placeholders. So there's 4 zeros in front, and then the 5, the 9, and we've decided that we need to round the 7 up to an 8. Now please listen to this. We're just dropping the place values after where the 7 used to be. Okay, that includes the original 8, 3, 1. They just got dropped. We don't turn those into zeros because they would become significant. In this answer now, I have 3 sig figs. That's what I was asked to find. Alright, let's move on to the second example. Let's find our 3 sig figs, or 3 places. We have the first number is the 8, and then we have the 5, and then the 4. So those will be my 3 sig fig places. Let's look behind the 4. I see a 3. We know from elementary school, 3 says round down or just leave it like it is. So I'm going to keep the 8, the 5, the 4. Now please listen to this. This is very important. We can't just drop all the rest of these numbers, because if I don't do something, the 8, the 5, and the 4 have lost their place. As you can see over here, those 3 numbers belong to the 100 millions, 10 millions, and millions place. If I write it like you see on my paper, that's 854, which is completely the wrong place for those. So what I have to do is a little different from the previous example. I've got to zero out those place values. Okay, got to zero it out. Now notice I stopped. This is where the decimal would have been, but I stopped there. I didn't drop after the decimal. And that's kind of what rule 3 tells you. Never turn numbers behind the decimal into zeros. You got to drop them. You got to drop them. And the numbers before the decimal to the left, those are the ones you got to keep those places and turn them into zeros. So it's a little different. Let me recap real quick. In the first example, we had zeros at the end that had to be dropped because behind the decimal we drop after the last sig fig. To the left of the decimal we have to convert those places into place holding 0 up to the decimal, where we stop, do not put the decimal, and do not turn anything behind the decimal into zeros. Let's do a couple more of examples, and I think you'll have it. In the first set down here, round the following number to 4 sig figs. Alright, let's figure out where those places are. The first sig fig is the 9, and then we have the 5, the 4, and then this 8 will be the 4th place. So look behind that 8, decide if you should round up or down. We're going to get a 9, a 5, a 4, and that 7, I hope you decided, should turn that 8 into a 9. Okay, so that's my 4 sig figs for that problem. Now, we've got to turn everything behind that 9 into a place holding 0. So the 7 becomes a 0, the 1 becomes a 0, 2, and the 9. So those last 4 places, the 7, the 1, the 2, the 9, became place holding zeros. Alright, number 2, we're going to do the same thing, 4 sig figs. Alright, so remember all these first 4 here are placeholders. The first sig fig is the 3, so we have the 4, the 9, and then this first 1. So look behind that first 1. There's also another 1. That means we're going to have to round down. So let's keep our placeholders, the 3 zeros. Let's put our sig figs, 3, 4, and look behind it. Oh, I ain't gotten there yet. So 3, the 4, the 9, and behind that 1's another 1. So we're keeping that 1. Do not turn those last 2 sig figs here into a rounded answer. That would give you 6. That's too many. So we just drop. Alright, let's do a couple in the next section. This time we're going to go to 2 sig figs. So looking at number 1 here, we've got a 9 and a 9. There's a 1 behind it, so we're going to leave everything as is. That one's relatively easy. It's just 0.99. The next one, we got a lot of 4s here. So we got a 1, 2 4s. That's all we need. That's 4 and 4. Let's look behind it. There's another 4. So round down. Leave it as it is. So those are my 2 sig figs. And now we've got to turn all those other place values into place holding zeros. So the 4, the 4, the 4, and then the last 3 4s. And that gives me 2 sig figs. Alright, so let's skip down toward the bottom now. And let's look at number 2 and 3, and let's call it a day. So in number 2, we want to round that one to 3 sig figs. So let's follow the same rules. We got a placeholder, a 5, a 7. Oh, and this time I have a 0 I want to keep. So I got the placeholder, the 5, the 7, and should I keep that a 0 or should I round it up to 1? Well, looking behind that first 0 is another 0. So that means I round down and I keep that as a 0. So wait a minute. You're thinking that I told you a few seconds ago you couldn't do that. You had to drop zeros at the end. That's not exactly what I said. You put down all the sig figs that you get from the rounding rules, and then beyond that you drop. We're going to drop the last 0 in the 8. But this 0, this place value is what's more important. This place value needed to be significant in my answer. So even though it's a 0, that's perfectly fine. In my final answer, I have 1, 2, 3 sig figs. Alright, this last one you're going to love. It's a good one. So looking at our 3 sig figs, we've got an 8, a 6, another 0. So that place value has to count. Let's look behind it. There's a 2. So that means we're going to round down. 860. That is the 100 million, 10 million, and 1 million place values. So we're going to turn all the thousands into 0 placeholders, and then 100, 10, and the ones place, we're going to drop the 0.4 completely. We're not going to zero that out. We're just dropping it completely because it's after the decimal. And that leaves me this number. I wanted 3 sig figs. Did I get 3 sig figs? If you're looking closely, the answer is no. The 8 and the 6. But the way I've written this, when we learned our sig fig rules before, there's no way that can be significant. The rule says it's not. I only have 2 sig figs. So we've got a problem. I can't do this and move the decimal, because now that changes the place value. That makes it 860. So that's garbage. I can't do that. There's only one solution to this problem, and this is what scientific notation was invented for. What I need to do is put this number in scientific notation. Remember, the rules say put the decimal after the first sig fig and then all other sig figs on the left, and separate those from your placeholder. So if you just take a look at that for the moment, now instead of 860 million, I'm writing down 8.60, and in the format that it's written, those are 3 sig figs, 8.60, the 0 counts. And then all we do now is take these placeholders into consideration. 3, 6, 8 places of placeholder, and that puts the 8, the 6, and the 0 back into the millions, 10 millions, 100 millions place. And that is the only way to write that number to the appropriate number of sig figs. Again, that's why sig fig or scientific notation was invented, to help you in situations like that. Alright, I hope that made sense. Do your practice on your own. If you have any questions, make sure you seek out a teacher or someone to help you with it. And we'll see you next time.